Jesus was a prophet, but perhaps a little bit different than some of the other prophets that we've been looking at, studying during this Lent. There's just kind of a difference in style and a difference in tone compared to what we might expect out of a prophet. Many of the prophets were working in situations that were incredibly difficult. They felt like they had to have a lot of kind of energy behind their voices, a lot of sense of urgency. And so our picture of a prophet is someone who is perhaps standing on a soapbox in the middle of a crowd, exhorting them, whether they were listening or not. And that wasn't exactly Jesus' style. There was that little time in the temple where he turned things over and he had some harsh words. But if you look over the totality of the stories of Jesus and the way that he worked in the world, his style was quite a bit different. If a prophet's job is to point toward the truth, the reality that people don't seem to be getting, if the purpose of a prophet is to point out the things that are to come, then Jesus was certainly doing that work. And yet he was using a variety of methods in order to do that, which makes a lot of sense. If you're going to try to accomplish something, that you might need to try different things with different people in order to get that point across. So we have the stories of Jesus and healing. Jesus meeting the immediate needs of the people that he was with. Jesus doing these one-on-one interactions, even as other people were nearby noticing what was going on. And then we had Jesus, the teacher, who told stories. He didn't tend to rail or exhort. As a matter of fact, his style could have been confusing to many people because he would trace pictures in the sand and he would tell these kind of elliptical stories that not only pointed to the truth, perhaps gave people room to see the truth that they needed to see. So even rather than saying, "This is the way," which may have been his intention, he created space and room for people to respond, to see what it was that they needed to see, to hear what they needed to hear, if they were ready to see and hear. And Jesus was often about sharing his power and his authority, calling other people to help him with his work, realizing that he was not just the only one, that he needed disciples, he needed people to do this work with him, not just the 12 disciples, but people all around, people in communities that he called out and pulled into his work. So again, just in terms of the form of the way that Jesus worked, he was showing people not only the message, but he was showing them the way. Here is what you do, even perhaps after I'm gone. This story of this parade, this little palm processional that happened, it could have been that there were fewer people in that parade than there were in the one we just had right now. We don't really know. The Park Service wasn't there to count them. And of course, they're always underestimating anyway, but regardless, we don't know whether this was a huge deal that everyone knew about and everyone heard about, or whether it was something that just kind of happened at some intersection near Jerusalem as people were pouring into the city for Passover. And yet we know this story has persevered in our tradition, which means it's something important. That it's important that Jesus didn't plan a great campaign, that he didn't have all his advanced people except for those 2 poor disciples that had to go out and find this unridden donkey. And even that part, it didn't sound like Jesus planned that very far ahead. It was kind of like, well, we're walking up to Jerusalem. Oh, I forgot the part about the donkey. Can you go get me something to ride on? And does he pick a noble steed or a large, imposing animal? No, he chooses a humble animal. And the parade is created out of the palms or the branches or whatever it was that people found by the side of the road. And their own cloaks that people were giving of their own coats and clothing in order to create this way for Jesus. It's this interesting combination of a kind of quiet power Jesus was recognized. Jesus was recognized for both good and ill. People recognized that he had a power to him. In the stories, we hear of the great crowds that would gather around him, that the word spread around. In a time when the word could only spread by word of mouth, people heard about Jesus, and they came to him in droves. Not because he was tweeting or posting his whereabouts on Facebook, or even using those advanced people that seem to be so important these days. He was relying just on what he did to help people see and hear what he had to say. Jesus was pointing to a new reality, a reality where the unexpected could happen, a reality where the people without power might find themselves and their fullness and their place in the world and their place in God's heart. Jesus had this message that spoke to the deepest places in his followers and still speaks to the deepest places in our lives. We know, don't we, that we can be confused by power, that we can be misled by power. The power is easy to manipulate. And yet Jesus worked in the world in this relatively brief time that he was doing his ministry in a way that was full. It was full of life. It was full of health. It was full of possibility. It was full of hope. It was full of community. All of these things that are still so important for us today. Jesus was a prophet. He was pointing out the things to come, the things that would happen even after he was gone. The possibility, no less, of reordering the world. Amen.